Hello, welcome to the All or Nothing podcast. Our official sponsors are KR Couriers and Transport Limited. This is a Northwest based courier company delivering all across the UK. They can assist in home moves and removals to large, heavy and bulky items, collections and drop-offs. Fast, safe and reliable deliveries. Please get in touch for a free quote. You'll find all the information within the description. Thank you. Hello everybody and welcome to the Billy Moore podcast, and today's special guest is Sam Gillingham. Sam, thanks for coming along, and what an interesting story you've got. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be able to speak about, I suppose, the journey and the situation that I found myself in over the past sort of 30 odd years.
It's been a long time, hasn't it? It's like,
it has.
You know, if you don't know Sam's story, Sam has got. There's a story on Netflix called The Investigator.
A British crime story, The Investigator. It was series 1.
Yeah, a British
4-part documentary.
Yeah, and it was all based on the story of your father, what went on with your mum.
Yep.
How you saw it through your eyes.
Yeah.
It was quite, to be honest, I watched it and thought, wow, it's powerful. It really is. You know, the shit that was going on was unbelievable.
Yeah, I think I've only just about managed to be able to keep up, because certainly when this started back in, for 8.5 years, I didn't even know that there was anything that was wrong. So my mother, she went missing in 1985, as you know, but it wasn't until my father faked his death in 1993 that then we were trying to find my mother. Obviously, at the time, we didn't know that it was an insurance fraud that my father had carried out. But certainly from 1993 to date, I'm still looking for my mother. She still is missing.
And that's the search that still goes on for you, for some kind of peace of mind, at the least, isn't it?
I think because of setting out at the beginning was obviously not thinking that, as I said, that there was anything wrong with my mother being missing. I thought that for the circumstances that were happening at the time when she did disappear, that it was... I can understand why she did go, because it wasn't that long after when she went that I also left the family home as well. Yeah. And basically the three of us, my father, my mother and I, fractured into 3 pieces until unexpectedly all of a sudden your world gets turned upside down, and everything that you thought actually now isn't true. You know, there's an element of my life obviously that is true, and there's lots of things that we did that did exist. But I didn't quite realise just how much that there was like a subline almost to my parents' dynamics and what happened to my mother.
Yeah, because you were just a young schoolgirl, weren't you, at the time? And you, from what I recall, there was a note left on the kitchen table saying, "I've had enough, I'm leaving." Yeah. And a ring placed on top of it. Yeah. And to you, that was like, you noticed that your mum had enough like a long time before, and you just thought or assumed that was the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, things were intensely very, very stressful. We had my parents, myself, and also my father's girlfriend living all in the same house, and it wasn't a secret to any of the parties that the relationship was ongoing between my father and Patricia. And my relationship with my mother wasn't very good either. I was very much more a daddy's girl than what I was, a close relationship with my mother. So to come home one day, I was 16, and then to come home and then find that note, to me, that made perfect sense, that she would decide that intensity of the breakdown of her marriage to my father, and also the fact that we were arguing as well, that she would leave. And she was a very capable lady. She was earning very, very good money. My parents were electronic engineers in the aircraft industry. And so, you know, she was a lady who was earning big bucks back in 1985. You know, I'm talking £300-400 a week. And I know that even now in 2022, 300-400 quid a week would not be something that you would sniff at as far as basic income to come in, let alone then.
It's a good little wage, isn't it? It's like, what, 22 grand a year or something?
Yeah, seriously. I mean, my father at the time, he had a contract in Italy at the time, and I think that he was on something like 22-25 pounds an hour, so 1985, big money. So I didn't think that I didn't think at that time that there was anything untoward with regards to my mother actually going. And as I said, within 2 months, my father asked me also to leave the house. And I'd pretty much had enough myself already then. I'd told my father that I didn't love him anymore. I was kind of like, I wasn't really quite accepting the fact that from Patricia being sort of an included part of the family unit, as it were, but now she was almost now the replacement for my mother. And regardless if I didn't get on with my mother, you're not going to be a replacement for her. And I didn't feel too comfortable about the fact that now she was now jointly in control with my father, when that hadn't been the case. We had been a very insular family, my father and my mother and I, and with all the travelling that we did. And so to have somebody else who had invaded, I wasn't happy with.
Yeah, so tell us the story about how it all began and what's gone on since, because you've had, from what I recall, and I spoke to your son, and I don't mean to be rude, I like your son, but I don't think I'll be putting his on before yours because it goes in chronological order in age, which is only fair.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
his story comes after yourself,
Yeah.
and I hope he understands that. I'm sure he will, Neil. However, he's had his demons, he's been through his struggles, and obviously that's because of the trauma that he's have had to deal with.
Yeah, and trauma that you can't control, because obviously I don't think, unless somebody has actually experienced somebody going missing, especially when obviously I hadn't had that much to do with my father in that 8.5 years, because after I left home, I literally was on my own. I was homeless, so I left from a very nice house to now being underneath Bournemouth Pier. And in a very quick period of time, I found myself in Holloway Prison. I was in prison within a year, so I was now 17, and I was still very much on my own. And then leaving prison when I was now 18/19, and then trying now to sort of do the right thing, but maybe still, it's very, very difficult, isn't it, for anybody when you've got no support network around you. You know what's right and what's wrong, but sometimes there'll be circumstances that maybe take you down a road that you wouldn't necessarily have gone down, but that's just what happens. I've been with my husband, Neil Senior, since I was 17, and we both were separated by going into prison. And then very quickly after Neil was released, is that we were married within 26 days. It's kind of like all of my life seems to be a bit sort of like not as straightforward as maybe other people's lives. But within a year after that, in 1989, young Neil was born. And I did try to contact my father at the time to let him know that I was pregnant. And the only way I could do that was to contact Dorset Police and ask them to get a message to him, to say that I urgently needed to speak to him. And my father did call me, obviously unexpectedly. I didn't know that he was going to contact me. And basically he said, "What do you want?" And I said to him, "I don't want anything off of you." I was absolutely on this complete determined mission that one day I would be able to go back to my father, and I would be able to say to him, despite the fact that you dumped me like that, despite all of the promises that you had made me as I was a child, of how there would always be a room for me and that you would buy me my first flat and all this kind of bullshit that eventually transpired, is that I would be able to go back to him and say, "Do you know what, despite you, despite everything, is that I've made it." And bearing in mind at that time, as I said, I didn't know there was anything untoward with my mother. But yeah, he called me and just said to me, what do you want? So I said, I don't want anything. I said, I just wanted to let you know that you're going to be a grandfather. And his response to me was that he didn't want to talk to me right now.
Mm-hmm.
He might want to talk to me around about 5 years' time or so. But he didn't have any interest, and he actually called my son a little shit. Obviously, my son wasn't born yet then. And my response to him then, I still had, obviously, this fire in my belly, thinking to myself, do you know what? And I said to him, maybe in 5 years' time, I won't want to talk to you. And I put the phone down. I was absolutely distraught because I felt once again that this misconception of just how important and how vibrant this relationship had been with my father up to the age of 16 didn't have the same meaning to him as what it did to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, fine, whatever. Anyway, young Neil was born. As it does to many people, obviously I had now my own son, and life continues. And don't get me wrong, it was very, very difficult. We were we weren't rich by any means, and very much, struggling from week to week. And then one day, I had gone to work, and my husband called me and said to me, "The police have come to our doorstep." And although we were trying to toe the correct line, we maybe were just shy of that line as far as making our way through life. So the police coming to the doorstep wasn't particularly, have we done anything wrong? We don't think we've done anything wrong. Anyway, I said to Neil, we haven't done anything wrong, I'm going to call them. And the police wouldn't talk to me over the phone. And then they turned up that evening, and I answered the door, and they said, "Is your father Russell Causley?" And my father wasn't Russell Causley, but I knew where the name Causley had come from because Patricia's surname was Causley. And I said, "Well, Russell Packman." And they said, "Yes." And they said, "Is there anybody else in the house with you?" And I said, "Yes, my husband's here and some friends were there." And they said, "We've got some really bad news for you. Your father's missing, presumed dead, off the coast of Guernsey." And my life literally dropped. Rock bottom. I frantically tried to make phone calls to contact my father's parents. I hadn't spoken to them since I was 14, and I was 24 by now, and they said they didn't want to talk to me. They said we would appreciate it if actually you never called this number again. So I said, okay, fine, put the phone down. I was phoning from a phone box at the time. And so I phoned up my father's sister, and she was different. And I broke down, I really did. And I have never, ever experienced such depths of grief and trying to find desperately answers as to what had happened, trying desperately to speak to Patricia because I spoke to Guernsey police. I couldn't speak to them until the next day, and I spoke to Guernsey police, and they told me who was on the yacht with my father. And then I was trying desperately to get hold of Patricia, and I think I spoke to Patricia maybe around about a week later, and she kept on just saying how she'd lost her husband, and I said to her, "But he's not your husband." And she repeated it again, and I said, "Listen, he's not your husband because he's married to my mother." And I didn't know at that time that where or when they had last seen my mother at that stage, because they still had the family home in Bournemouth. And she basically said to me, "Fuck off, Sam. I've got my own grief to deal with," and put the phone down. And 4 months later, basically, I mean, I had insurance investigator come to my house and the police come to my house, and they basically said to me, "Just get on with your life." And at that stage, Billy, I I said to the insurance investigator, go away. My father would never dream of doing what you're insinuating that he's done. That is not my father. And I truly believed that he was dead. And but 4 months later, in the February of 1994, I had a phone call to say that my father was in police custody, that he was well, and I asked if I could speak to him, to which that was refused. And then Dorset Police started to show more interest in my mother's disappearance, whereas in that previous 4 months, while we were trying to find my mother, Guernsey Police had been to Dorset Police and said to them, listen, there might be something untoward here. And Dorset Police said, go back to your island, you mind your own business, and you carry on doing what you're doing, but there's nothing to see here. But then when my father, because it was for almost £1 million that my father's insurance fraud was for, is they then came up to see me to then ask me some more questions about the run up to 1985, what the dynamics of the house was, when did I last see my mother, and they started to do the normal in-depth searches that you would do looking to find somebody, because it only took them a week to find me. And bearing in mind that I had been married, and obviously I wasn't in Dorset anymore, and I wasn't in London, I was now in Northamptonshire. And
so you left footprints, hadn't you?
So I had left footprints for them to be able to basically trace me, but unfortunately that was not becoming as easy with my mother.
Which is odd. Straight away.
Yeah, in
this day and age, or any day and age.
Yeah, and I think that we were, the searches that they could do were better in the 1980s and 1990s. Certainly, technology was coming forward, and we were leaving more traces. And of course, that has jumped way beyond now with regards to the footprints that we can leave inadvertently behind us. But unfortunately, all of the normal checks on my mother. Even though the aircraft industry is obviously global, it's a very niche industry, the electronics engineers, so they're job shoppers, and they pretty much know who's working, and a lot of the time they will move with their teams and take people that they like to work with. So you would have thought in that sort of field, why on earth would she do anything else? She didn't know anything else. Is that she would have been found. But what actually the information that we started to then get was that my father and Patricia had been committing smaller frauds in the bigger lead up to that big fraud. That was the one where my father, I think, was intending to retire and basically furnish their lifestyle that they would like to have, which was quite expensive. But obviously at my cost emotionally, and with little regard either for my mother that had already been missing. Some of the things that the police, and it was very difficult because I don't have any brothers or sisters, and apart from my aunt, I didn't really have any valuable input from any of the wider family that I didn't know anyway. Sometimes it's rather difficult when you've got people, I may as well just go and pluck somebody off the street and say, listen, will you be part of my family, And, but some of the things that the police then were then saying to me was that my mother had been in Canada in the late 80s, but it transpired actually that it was Patricia who had gone to Canada using my mother's passport and using my mother's green card, and had been removed by the Royal Mounted Police over there because, believe it or not, this woman, she knew no bounds as to how much that she was now going to take over my mother's life. And she went and worked in exactly the same office as what my mother had worked in the early 80s, 5 or 6 years beforehand. And Patricia was removed from the country, and unfortunately you know, in hindsight, when you look back with regards to opportunities that possibly that, you know, even when I was getting into trouble with the police myself and I was telling them about my background, that nobody looked into it anymore. Because unfortunately, as does happen, and this really does annoy me, people's perception of people versus maybe listening to that person. Because at the time, with me being 17, going off of the rails, but my father living quite literally in this big house up on a big hill of a drive with his nice watch and his nice car and speaking very nicely, not that I didn't, but of course versus me in my lace-up jeans and getting stoned, etc., is that who are they going to listen to? They're not going to listen to the 17-year-old. They're going to listen to the man who stood there going, oh yes, my daughter, she's causing me so much trouble now. Oh yes, I'm ever so sorry, Mr. Packman, you know, well, if you need us, you know, come and get us. But nobody listened to the fact that I had already been saying that I was concerned and that my mother, I hadn't seen my mother. Nobody listened.
So what's transpired going forward?
So everybody who was on the yachts were basically, they were all found guilty in one way or another, or pleaded guilty and were sentenced accordingly.
One of them, I remember watching him. He had sort of selective memory.
Yeah. I've got to. This will maybe sound a bit weird to people. It's quite weird actually as to how my relationships with some of the people, some of the players that have been involved, that maybe previously would have been foes, but now actually you actually listen to them. And exactly what I'm saying is that I'm never one who would be. I think you've got to be a real big arsehole for me actually to then say, do you know what, you're not you're not worthy of my time. And certainly Hackett Jones, the solicitor who was on the yacht, he was certainly one that, believe you me, he got both barrels while my father was missing. My harassment of his surgery, his practice, and saying, listen, you need to be flipping talking to me, was no doubt. Well, it was to the point that they actually phoned the police and said, could you please get her to cease and desist? I do talk to Anthony now. And in fact, actually, I had lunch with Anthony and Neil only a few weeks ago at Neil's house. Sometimes, again, people get themselves, as I said, into things that maybe in hindsight, if you actually look at it as to who actually was being dragged into something or who actually deserves to be vilified for the rest of their life, and Anthony does not go into that class. I wasn't very impressed with the way that Mark Williams-Thomas pushed Anthony to tell his truth. And my relationship, actually, just digressing just slightly, but my relationship with Mark Williams-Thomas post the Investigator disintegrated quite rapidly again. He's not a trustworthy person, and he certainly did not do as he said that he would.
It's the Investigator.
After the Investigator, yeah.
I think it was all for a bouquet of flowers, just for the glory of.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And he needs to be kept away from people that are victims of crime like me, because this isn't some sort of flipping game here. You know, this is my life. These are my people, and this has had such profound impact. And I'm quite one as well that's quite willing, like today, to sit here, to tell my story, but also to try and to say to people that despite the fact that if something really traumatic happens to you, that it doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't have to break you.
Yeah.
That you can flip that on its head, and that you can, although it obviously, it's the making of you in the sense of the impacts that it has and how you actually then try to then push that forward. But don't then dismiss the effect and the wounds that we still have. And I felt that that he took advantage of that, and I wasn't that impressed, to tell you the truth, with what he did with Anthony. But anyway, so everybody gets sentenced. Father gets put inside for a couple of years, as Anthony ended up with the worst sentence out of all of them. Patricia just gets a suspended sentence. Nobody wants to talk to me. I'd only had one further conversation with my father when the police had been to see him. And all the time, throughout all of this, is I've been saying to them, I want to have a conversation with my father. I need to speak to him. And my father called me out of the blue and said that Dorset police had just left him. And I said, okay. And the next sentence, no, he actually opened up this conversation, and he says, well, Sam, the police have just left me, and they still have not managed to arrest me for the murder of your mother. And I was kind of like taken aback, obviously, because I'm shocked. I know that the police are looking into it, but I was shocked by his opening sentence. And I said to him, I didn't realise that they were. All we need is just some help. And you two have been the closest with regards to engagement with, with my mother. And anyway, he didn't help them. He just fed them more bullshit. Patricia was made to stay silent. And I think looking back now is that you can definitely understand that the control that was needed of the situation, because obviously at the moment, imagine that he's on a sand dune at the moment and he's kind of like trying to get his grip back. And so he's trying to keep control of it. And, the police go. My father, when he was inside, the gate arrested him. And they did charge him. They charged him with the murder of my mother, despite the fact that she had not been found still. And it took us up to 1996. It was December 1996 before we eventually got to the first court case at Winchester. And it took us around about 3 weeks, I think it was, to go through that trial. I gave evidence. Patricia didn't. My father didn't. And even in that courtroom, my father, across the courtroom, smirked at the discomfort and how scared I was of the importance. Winchester Crown Court is absolutely huge. And, I was still suffering. I was as skinny as a rake, and you could see the stress that I'd been going through. Because, of course, by now, you're 3 years in. Nobody could have forewarned me at the beginning just how deep that I was going to have to dig. And how much that it takes and how important it is for you to tell the truth, because of the importance of what you're doing. The courage that's needed, to stand in that court. And the man that you've had up here is now, he's not that man, is he? Because he's now standing for the worst thing that somebody could do. Murder is bad enough. Murder where you've actually committed a murder and you've actually gone to the lengths that you have to make sure that we would never be able to find that person, or that you would do your absolute utmost to defy the process of justice for your own selfish gain. Even though that you're watching and you know that you're bullshitting, you know that you're doing that. And yet you'll still continue. And he was found guilty. Unanimous verdict. And you kind of feel as well that after that, like you're coddled by the system as a victim, and you've got all the best legal team, you've got the best QCs, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're out your life, and then you're then sat there thinking, right, I've got to get myself together. We were broke, absolutely broke. I was offered at the time, and we came back home, and it was Christmas. My father was convicted literally a week before Christmas of 1996. And we came back home. We hadn't been working. And because of the trial, so we had very limited income. I had a very young son who was watching, and we were trying to keep him away. But obviously when you've got such long-term impact of such sadness and such complexities going on, that's very difficult to keep from your child. Yeah, definitely. And we tried to make Christmas as best as we could. I was asked to go to the Moat House Hotel in Northampton Town Centre to meet the news of the world. There was a huge amount, obviously, of media interest at the time of the conviction. And they put a contract in front of me. I can't remember now if it was £30,000 or £35,000 that was offered to me. And I left my husband with the journalists, and I walked over to the reception. I said, could I use your phone, please? And they said, yeah. And I phoned up Dorset Police. The first team of Dorset Police were just amazing. I had Chris Diamond and I had Paul Donnell. And, proper old school police.
Yeah.
And ironically, Paul Donnell actually had arrested me previously, many years beforehand. So it was kind of weird now that we were now on the same side, as it were. We're on the proper side of the law. We're not doing anything wrong. And I phoned up and I said to them, listen, I said, I'm sat with the News of the World at the moment. And there's this money that's on the table. And I don't know what to do. I didn't have anybody else that I could phone to ask the question. And their advice to me was they said to me, Sam, the thing that you've got to bear in mind is that if you take the money, is that you're then opening yourself up completely. You never quite know as to how that's going to go. And so my advice to you would be is to turn it away. Okay, thank you. And I walked back to the coffee table where Neil was sat. And I looked at the two journalists and I said to them, thank you very much. I said, but no, thank you. I'm not doing this. And I said to my husband, come on, we're going.
Was he like, hey, where are you going?
he
Awful
said,
lot of money there.
He was a lot of money. And it was a lot of money that certainly that, most probably would have maybe given me, an opportunity at that time to have been able to have maybe changed my life. Maybe a little.
Your integrity was more important.
My integrity was important. And he said to me, Sammy, he said, I can't believe you've just done that. And I said to him, there's more important things sometimes, Neil, than money. I said, come on, let's go. And he was just like, and that was it. He never held it against me, and I never looked back or regretted that. I kind of felt sort of like quite big, if you know what I mean.
Did he say and come back with a counter offer? Because that's the usual, isn't it?
No, I that was it. And should I tell you the other thing also that I didn't like about that either? At the time of talking to the News of the World, do you know what they were more interested in? One of the questions that they asked me was, and let's remember, looking back on the News of the World's history and what's happened subsequently to the News of the World, they said to me, while you were looking out for your mother walking up the drive, while you knew that your father and Patricia were in bed with each other, could you hear any noises? I'm just kind of like, in the whole scheme,
the seediness
of all of this shit, that's all that you're flipping interested in. I was just like, do you know what? So anyway, so we walked away from that. And my father then took us through, from 1996 up to 2003, year upon year of appeals.
Yeah.
We ended up in the High Court numerous times. And eventually, thanks to the CCRC, that had now been implemented as well, is which obviously it depends on which side of the fence as to whether or not you're for them or flipping I hate them, and they gave him another opportunity in court, and his conviction was overturned in 2003, but we were granted a retrial because Dorset Police was still absolutely adamant, completely 100% behind their case and their conviction. And so we went to trial again. Now, in the first trial, we had a lot of circumstantial evidence. People travelled far. People travelled from Canada to give evidence because of the importance of how they felt of making sure that there was other people that were supporting, obviously, my mother. And but we had 3 prisoners in the first trial whose evidence was. 2 of which, there were 3, one was dismissed as a red herring, and there were 2 prisoners that were that they asked to come to court to give evidence. And one of them, Murphy, was asked as to whether or not he had ever done anything, given evidence in a trial like this before, to which he said no. And through my father's legal team and their digging, Murphy had actually in the 1970s given evidence in exactly the same way for exactly the same sort of case. And on that basis, on that technicality, my father's conviction was overturned and thrown out. So trial number 2, we didn't have any of the prisoners. We got rid of all of them. But we had one other key piece of information that we didn't have beforehand that wasn't allowed to be used because of my father's father. He wouldn't allow his wife to give evidence and said that even more of the old school, of the elder generation, we don't want to be getting involved in that. Which in some ways as well is that you think, well, hang on a minute. If that was your daughter, would you still have that same stance? So, and that evidence was that my grandmother, my father's mother, had been at the house in Bournemouth, and my father and Patricia had an argument, and she said that she overheard my father saying to Patricia, "I've already got rid of one wife, don't make me get rid of another." And that was quite a heavy, loaded sentence for somebody independent.
It's a big statement, isn't it?
It's a very, very big statement. So anyway, in the spring of 2004, we were back in Exeter and we had the second trial. And once again, no Patricia. Once again, no father. Nothing to say. And obviously I gave evidence again. For completely different experience. A very intimate court is Exeter. And he was found guilty again, and so he was resentenced again, but he had his life recommendation, but the 16 years that had been recommended to him from 1996, that still stood. So even though we were now in 2004, we only had another 8 years, so 2012, and then
for his release,
the parole board would start to then knock on our door, and they did defer that. We did have quite a big period of where you do definitely, things are quiet, you know where he is. I've always been very vocal over still saying about my mother, and that if anybody had ever had any information, then please come forward, because it isn't a case of, in this sort of scenario, where it's over and done with and dusted and that's it, we'll just put that to bed. And if I called it a section and I thought that first section was hard enough, I can honestly say that I think from 2014 up to 2020, that 6 years was most probably the most intense. My father played further head games of just inflicting further trauma from his cell, making a confession. And I've got the parole board also knocking on my door, sometimes twice a year, asking me for my opinion as to whether or not I thought, or what did I think of my father's next parole hearing. And also, they don't understand. I don't think, I'll tell you what, the parole system, okay, it's a testing flipping process for you to work yourself through.
Yeah.
And it's even more testing when at the same time you can't even say this is something, as I said, that had happened history-wise. This was still something that was happening very real time. Off the back of my father's confession in 2014 that he very kindly released to us, is that we had a third police investigation. It was the third one. We'd had one every decade for 30 years now. This was a completely different team. It was a completely different police force, to be perfectly honest with you as well. If I was to grade them, the first lot were absolutely amazing, the second lot were brilliant, and the third lot were woefully incompetent. There is no other way to describe them. I may as well have been headbutting a wall with regards to how they were actually looking at this, and how they were so dismissive and they weren't willing to do anything with the confession. And it's very difficult when you've got that on one side, and that obviously is raising your, heightening your angst that you've got. And then on the other side with the parole board, they're saying, Mrs. Gillingham, could you please calm down? And you're going, you want me to calm down? Are you aware of what I'm dealing with on this side?
Yeah.
And you want me to calm down? You know, I don't like the fact that you write a statement to them and then it has to be submitted for their approval. Why does that need to be submitted for approval? You have to then ask permission. Will you allow me to then go to the parole hearing so that I can read my statement out? But you're not allowed any other part of that parole system. I don't like the fact that when you convict somebody, they're convicted in an open court where everything is laid before you. You know everything. You know all about their medical history. You know how they're feeling. You know what they've said, haven't said. All of it is all in front of you. When you get to the parole part of it, what's the point in coming and knocking on my door as a victim and asking me for my opinion if you do not furnish me with all of the information that I need to be able to then put a purposeful report together for you?
Yeah.
Please do not take my passion as aggression. Please look at that and assess that for what it is, which is passion, and also what's right and what's wrong. If I'm telling you that I'm feeling as a victim that he's further perverting the course of justice, if anybody else had done what my father did in a lifetime crime, that person would be taken in for perverting the course of justice.
Well, of course, yeah. Definitely, yeah.
But my father can sit under the umbrella of the judicial system and he can write a 6-page statement where he goes into graphic detail of how he burnt my mother's body for 3 days.
Yeah, I've seen that on...
How would you like me to process that exactly? And don't forget, we've got the police force in the centre, the people we're supposed to go to. Don't take anything into your own hands. Don't do anything. Oh, we don't like that aggression a little bit, Mrs. Gillingham. Thames Valley come along. Northamptonshire Police contact me. We've had a complaint for threats to kill. Sorry, I haven't threatened to kill anybody. No. Perception this comes under perception. So when you said that when your father gets released is that you will find him, and I look you dead in the eye and say, I will find him because I want to have a conversation with that man. That's perceived. I'm going to find him and I'm going to kill him. Hang on a minute, guys. Let's just be logical about this. Let's think about Patricia Causley. So out of all of the people in this, and bearing in mind that I've said all the way along with regards to my thoughts for my father, do you think that I really care about Patricia? But have I known where Patricia has lived for the past 25 years? Yes, I have. Have I caused Patricia any harm? No. Have I had her sacked from quite a few jobs? Yes, out of principle, especially when I find that she's working for the Civil Aviation Authority still, very recently, and that was my mother's job, excuse me. Is my mother here? Do you think my mother would be happy? Let alone the fact that she's been missing now for almost 37 years.
Yeah.
Do you think she would be happy if she knew that the woman who came in literally moved into her house while she was there, snatched everything out from underneath her, sold her house for her, worked as her, but she doesn't pay a little bit? Because I don't seem... We call Trisha Teflon Trish because just nothing will fucking stick. And but I've never done anything to her. And so why do you then think... Plus also, have you not seen what I've been busily doing with my own life, despite all of this cacophony of shit that's happening around me? Have you not seen how I've been still even more so staying focused on what I want to achieve myself? Do you honestly think that I'm going to let that piece of shit there, who has been the burden in my life, but also in parts, on a flip side, still a driving force in my life, do you think that I'm then going to then throw everything that I've done away for that?
Yeah.
Come on, guys, where's your flipping logic?
Oh, that just doesn't make sense, does it?
And you can't have this sort of conversation with them because they're not willing to listen. Because unfortunately, there's risk assessments. there's boxes to tick. There's kind of like, and then all of a sudden my father then becomes the one that they're then protecting on his way out of release for the murder of my mother, who still is missing. I don't think he should ever have been allowed free. How can you have it that somebody in a previous parole hearing, it is recommended that Mr. Causley should do this, this and this. And then when you ask, that when they get their next statement through, they then say Mr. Causley didn't do any of that. Why are you releasing him then? Why is this man safe?
It doesn't make sense at all, does it? There's no way.
Honestly, I think, to tell you his truth, of course we're going to have flashpoints where we peak up in frustration.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, though, is that both Neil and I, that we've actually tried to maintain as much calm, dignity. I'm really sorry if you're sick of me. Keep on banging on the door and keep on knocking and saying I'm not happy.
You know what? You should never be sorry, because you just said, there's passion and it's mistaken for anger and aggression. When in reality, it's like you want to know.
I want to know.
You want to know
where my mother is.
Anyone who loves their mother, father, sibling, whatever, and they're missing, would want to find out where they were. Or and I don't think people, like you said, understand how the other person's feeling.
No.
So your dad got released, didn't he, at one point?
Yeah, so October 2020, we knew it was coming. We'd lost. And I must admit, I felt pretty wounded. I went quite quiet, really, because I didn't initially, actually. But I think then when I did go looking for him. I had the phone call to say that he'd been released from jail. Because you don't know when it's going to happen.
No,
you just know it's within a week. And as soon as I had the phone call, I was at work, and I phoned up my line manager and I said, I've got to go. And he said, what do you mean you need to go? I said, I've got to go. And I got in my car. Where am I going? Where to go? For some no reason, and I can't remember, and I know that Neil has done a huge amount, we had a list of addresses of every single place that men who get released from prison go to. And so I headed down south, and I started searching. And they weren't happy. Some people were quite helpful, because obviously I was trying to talk to people that were just inside the gates. Can you help me? I'm looking for my father. We haven't had anybody new in here. Okay, cool. Moved along. Police got called at one stage as well at one of them. I spent the whole weekend. I was... the police got called, and and I'm walking along the road. I had one of my dogs with me, and they grabbed me by the arm, and I was just like, fuck, just fucking get off of me and just leave me alone. Am I doing anything wrong? Well, we want to talk to you. No, answer the question. Am I doing anything wrong? Am I allowed to walk along this street? Well, yes. Excellent. So you go on your way and you leave me be, and if I want to sit here opposite that house, and that's how I wish to spend my time, guess what? That's what I'm going to do. He's not here. I don't care what you're saying, okay? I'm looking for him. I couldn't find him. And the sensibility side then kicks in, and the reality, and you think, well, I've got to get back to work. So you go back to work. Don't get me wrong, you've got to be careful, right? You've got to be careful then as to what position that you then put yourself into. Knowing perfectly well as far as how quick that actually you think that you're going down one road and then the rug could be swept out from underneath your feet, and you're kind of like desperately then trying to say, no, that's not what the intention was here. So I tried to do the right thing by dealing with the authorities to try and still speak for my father. No, that's not happening. Okay, I left him be. And then October last year, we had another letter, an update letter to say that everything was fine. Okay, brilliant. Mother's still missing. That doesn't matter, does it? And then in December last year, I then get a phone call out of the blue to say that my father had been recalled back to prison. And so he's back in there now.
And that's where he is at the moment.
Yeah. And guess what loop to loop that we're about to start again? We're back down the parole system again because we've been put on notice for another oral parole hearing. But I don't know where I'm going to get with this. Tomorrow, I'm going to the probation. I've got an appointment in the afternoon because I've kept on asking over, I want to speak to my father. And I've then said to them, okay, well, if you're concerned, then, let's do this in a controlled environment. Now, as to whether or not my father's going to speak to me, if I was a betting person, I would say he's not going to allow it. But anyway, I'll carry on asking. But I'm meeting 2 people tomorrow from the probation who are facilitators in restorative justice.
Yeah.
And I'm going to sit in front of them. And I'm hopefully going to be able to keep my calm and just say to them, I just want to sit in front of him. And I can't deny that it's going to be so highly emotive. And I can't deny that I'm not going to be able to hold my temper. I'd be a liar if I didn't say that. However, I don't want to cause him any actual harm. But what I do want to do is I want to be able to sit opposite him, and I want to be able to look him in the eye and just say to him, what is this all about? And why can't you just tell me where she is? Why can't you just now stop messing us around? Because my mother will be missing 37 years this June now. And she'd only just turned 40 a matter of weeks before she went missing. My father's turning 79 in April. Patricia won't help because she's just interested in saving her own fucking skin. And I can't get her into a court of law.
She sounds like a lizard, to be fair.
I got so close. And then
I
got snatched underneath me.
Yeah, she does sound like a bit of a lizard.
And I'm fearful. I never fucked.
And it's like restorative justice. I've got some experience with them. I don't know if you've ever had any experience yourself.
I've got no idea.
It's more like a biblical kind of religious sort of sector within the prison service, but they don't go under the umbrella of religion in a sense. But what they do is honesty, integrity, self-awareness.
Yeah.
Trying to look at the victims' side of things.
Yeah.
And have a feel for them and the empathy. So, I've been on the receiving end of like the thoughts and feelings of what, and I hand on heart, it kind of felt bad about like what I did. I obviously shed a few tears myself when I shared, because we had to sort of like do a bit of affirmation about what we thought. So hopefully I'm not older than after 37 years. It's like a long time. So it's very cruel of him to keep that secret if he knows that
I don't understand what the gain is.
There's no gain, is there?
I just don't understand. I just think to myself, for Christ's sake, man.
Just tell us.
I just want to just say to him, are you off your fucking head?
I get
you are absolutely mental. This is madness. Just for me, just let it go. Just tell us. You've... Look at the time that you've wasted. I couldn't really... I'm just like... I don't understand how somebody can do this to somebody else. No. And I don't understand what I've done that's so bad, because I don't think of all nasty things about my father. He seems to think that I do, and I don't. And I just don't understand as to the fact that maybe it's out of embarrassment. Just the control, just because you can.
The all-powerful kind of knowing and not sharing.
I know what you want, but I think the thing for me as well is it was just that twisting of that knife over these past sort of 6-7 years, just to continually.
It's just constant cruelty. Silence is deadly, and I'm hoping this meeting that you have will sort of bring some.
I don't know.
Some kind of closure, at least, for both of you.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe for him, it'd be like.
I don't have. I don't feel
confident.
I don't feel confident about it. But I have to say that when I had the phone call just over a week ago, I was absolutely yes. I was just like, this is one of the better phone calls, Yeah. But whether or not I'm just setting myself up for another fall,
just go in with an open mind. That's
I don't
the best
know,
thing.
and I will have to wait and see. But and as to what happens to us next, for Pin, I think that anybody.
That's the question, right? What happens to you next? Because what happens next? Okay, let's look at a scenario. He says, "Yeah, this is what happened, and this is where your mother is, and this is where you'll find her." What happens next? Do you go and bury the remains, or do you go and place a memorial in that area? It's like there's a lot of questions that it's quite difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do? Is that the end? Is that a bit of an ending for you? Because you obviously 1,000,000%, she's not alive.
No.
That's 100%. It goes without saying. You've accepted that.
Yeah.
But what you don't accept, and which is rightly so, is what we don't know where she is.
Yeah.
If that was like I was on the opposite side. If that was me, people would be getting taken hostage and everything.
Well, many years ago, and many
years ago.
I really do mean early doors. I had people that offered me to go and kidnap Patricia. We'll put her in the back of the van. We'll start breaking her fingers. It's not the right thing to do. That's not what we should be doing now.
Sometimes it is. I don't know.
Actually, in some ways, in hindsight, you kind of think, because this was like 1993, 94 sort of era, is that you actually think to yourself, do you know what? Maybe I could have saved myself a whole heap of pain if actually I'd taken up one of those offers. But that's what I mean with regards to the knowing of, what is right and what is wrong.
Exactly,
and causing
yourself
more. Well, in some ways, that's exactly what Patricia has done to me, isn't it? Is that she has, and how far somebody will go to save their own skin versus actually thinking, do you know what? I can see that pain. Now, millions of people across the world have watched our story. Everybody sees my pain. Everybody sees Neil's pain, because he's had no choice but to just have this
constant in his life.
It's just constant.
Yeah, it's been in his life, hasn't it? Constant since he was born.
3. Well, since he was 3, is that has been with him, and the only thing that I do take from that is that everybody comes to the same conclusion with regards to Patricia's involvement and as to how they actually see her as a human being.
Yeah.
And for me as well, for my mother, is I haven't been able to get full justice, I felt, through the justice system, but I feel my mother would never have believed, particularly with what our relationship was, which was non-existent just before she disappeared, that she would ever have thought that 37 years on, I was still here, still talking and still saying, please do not forget that Carol Packman is still missing.
With that, it's been, I don't think there's anything else we could say regarding that, because that's what it's about. You're still here after all those years, and you're still as strong as it was back then.
Yeah.
So as we come to the end of the podcast, what would you, right, Sam, say? I always say this to every guest. I said it to Neil. What would you say to a young Sam Gillingham coming through the doors of life?
Be prepared.
Brilliant. What a shout.
Be prepared.
Yeah.
That's it.
Brilliant. I'm with that. I'll put all your details within the description. All the links to the investigative reports and anything else that you need to do. Just get the links down and we'll sort that. But it's been I've just been this is the first time really that people might say it's the first time that I've actually just sat, because it's like the story it flows chronologically. It's quite understanding. So I really, really appreciate you coming down, Sam. Thank you very much.
I really, really
and I wish you all the best with everything that's going forward.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.